Welcome to the NewsX World. Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. At least 30 Palestinians, including women and children, have reportedly been killed in strikes on Nusayrat. According to the Gaza Civil Defense Agency, it comes amid reports of aid trucks from Egypt being looted amid a continued concern over famine. Meanwhile, a diplomatic source has said that France will also join UAE and Jordan in dropping aid into the Gaza. As starving looms in the Strip, the UN Food Agency has also warned that Gaza's humanitarian crisis resembles the devastating 20th century famines in Ethiopia and Biafra, which together claimed over 2 million lives. The Kremlin said it wants to pursue peace in Ukraine just hours after deadly strikes across several regions that killed at least 25 people, including a pregnant woman and 16 prison inmates. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accused Russia of deliberately targeting a prison in the Zaporizhzhia region, wounding more than 40 others. An uneasy ceasefire between Cambodia and Thailand is mostly holding after peace talks in Malaysia, despite Thai allegations of post-truce skirmishes and the capture of 18 Cambodian troops. Both sides met for de-escalation talks today, as Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim confirmed a minor skirmish has been resolved now. More than 1,300 firefighters and a dozen waterbombing planes are battling 3 major wildfires in Portugal amid scorching summer heat, with most of the country on red alert. In Aruca, authorities have evacuated dozens of residents as the largest fire continues to burn since Monday. Indian Home Minister Amit Shah says that 3 of the terrorists that carried out the tragic April 22nd Pahalgam attack have been killed by Kashmiri forces. The announcement comes as India's lower house has been discussing Operation Sindoor at length in Parliament today. A police officer is among the casualties after a shooting inside a Manhattan skyscraper before the gunman turns the gun on himself. NYPD have identified the suspect as 27-year-old Shane Tamura of Las Vegas, with 4 others killed. Boeing has reported a reduced second quarter loss of $697 million compared to $1.4 billion a year ago. As the plane deliveries have increased, CEO Kelly Ortberg has said that operations are showing signs of stabilization following recent safety issues. A tragic incident unfolded in Manhattan earlier today. A gunman opened fire near a corporate office building on Park Avenue. At least 4 people have been killed in the shooting incident. The suspect, or the gunman, was neutralized in the incident. Following this, the investigation into the attacker is now underway. There are some big revelations that come to light. The shooter reportedly arrived in a BMW car, which was registered in his name. After the attack, the police found a rifle case with rounds, a loaded revolver, ammunition, and magazines in the suspect's car. Investigators revealed that the attacker was carrying a note at the scene voicing anger that his mental illness may be linked to his having played football. The mayor has even revealed that New York gunman thought he had brain injury condition. Now we are joined by Scott Faulkner. He's the head of Eagle Enterprises firm. Joins us live from Washington. Thank you, Scott, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. So how is this news covered, this tragedy covered in U.S. where you are?
It is obviously a major news story because we've not had a mass shooting in Manhattan, which is downtown New York City, in decades. So this is a huge story. Again, people are trying to grapple with the why someone would come all the way from Las Vegas to go to that particular building, to that particular floor, to start shooting people basically at random. So everyone is grappling with the why behind it, in addition to the how. How does somebody who has supposedly a documented psychological condition, get a weapon, get ammunition, and then drive basically 2/3 the way across America to this particular site and kill all these people. It is quite a traumatic moment here in America.
And now, given this shooter's claim, you've also mentioned his mental health issues that could be linked to potential brain injury from playing football. How should we be addressing this intersection of violent behavior and mental health in cases like these?
Well, chronic traumatic encephalopathy is something that a lot of people have who are playing contact sports, whether it be American football, soccer, or football worldwide, rugby. So when you start to have concussions, especially multiple concussions, you can have major brain damage and major psychological problems. So this is something that, and supposedly the National Football League, our National Football League, is headquartered in this building. And I think he was using that as one of the reasons why he targeted that building. They were on a different floor than the one that he went to. The key is that supposedly the documents that were left behind show that the CTE, as they call it, is a condition that he had, that he thinks he had because he played American football when he was a younger person. And this is a major issue within a number of our professional sports teams, not only in America, but worldwide.
And Scott, now, should there be more comprehensive screening or interventions for athletes at risk, also for people who are allowed to buy guns?
There should always be a very strong background check, and that's something that even people who are in essence pro-gun recognize that background checks are important. But again, the key here is that it's not the weapon, it's the shooter. How does somebody who has a possibly severe neurological condition get a weapon? But also, how do we begin to treat people with severe neurological conditions that might relate to contact sports?
And Scott, now this gunman arrived in his car. He had other multiple weapons in his car. So don't you think that there could be multiple opportunities for law enforcement to track or prevent him?
Again, the question becomes, was he up on the radar screen, so to speak, for either local Nevada police or the FBI? Again, if someone has a severe neurological condition and that person has not
Thank you very much. Sorry, Scott, we might have some technical connection there. Couldn't hear you by the end. That was Scott Faulkner. He's the head of Eagle Enterprises. Please stay with us as we'll come back to you, and thank you for joining us. Now, we move on to our next news. Russia has carried out deadly strikes across Ukraine, killing at least 25 people, even as the Kremlin claimed it remains committed to peace. Ukrainian officials say 4 Russian glide bombs hit a prison in Zaporizhzhia, killing 16 inmates and wounding dozens. Let's have a look at what an injured prison inmate had to say.
Был один прилет, потом на столовую, второй прилет, третий прилет. Ну и все. Темнота, пыль, все, люди кричат, стонут, мертвые, живые, без ног, горевшие. Не видно абсолютно. Перевязал одному человеку с нашего этого, ногу перевязал. Но он так и не доехал. Я не видел в темноте. Оказывается, у него нижней части ноги просто не было уже. То есть там, где я перевязал, бесполезно уже было. Ну, я футболку просто снял себе и все.
Russia has carried out deadly strikes across Ukraine, killing at least 25 people, even as the Kremlin claimed it remains committed to peace. Ukrainian officials say 4 Russian glide bombs hit a prison in Zaporizhzhia, killing 16 inmates and wounding others. Now we're joined back by Scott Faulkner for this discussion. He's the head of Eagle Enterprises. Thank you, Scott, for staying with us. Now, Russia has continued to claim its commitment to peace despite despite this ongoing deadly strikes. And how do you interpret the Kremlin's rhetoric versus its military actions?
Well, this is very consistent with the old Soviet Union, which, of course, Putin was a major spy and KGB executive with, and now Russia under Putin, that they say one thing and do another. Certainly, President Trump has been in Europe, especially up in Scotland. He has said that the deadline that he had given Putin, he might shrink that deadline because he's running out of patience with this person.
We are facing some technical issues here. Thank you very much, Scott Faulkner, for joining us and sharing your insight as head of Eagle Enterprises, a security firm. Now we move on to our next news. U.S. and Chinese officials held a second day of trade talks in Stockholm Tuesday, aiming to diffuse the economic tensions and extend a fragile tariff truce before an August 12 deadline. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and China's Vice Premier He Lifeng arrived for meetings at Rosenbad, the Swedish Prime Minister's office. After 5 hours of talks on Monday, no public statements were issued by either side. While major breakthroughs are unlikely, officials may agree to a 90-day extension of the truce, struck in mid-May, a move that could delay a return to triple-digit tariffs threatening global supply chains. Analysts say China holds key leverage through its control of rare earth exports, critical for defense and tech. Meanwhile, the U.S. accuses Beijing of flooding global markets with cheap goods, while China blames U.S. tech controls for stunting growth. The Stockholm talks come just after President Trump has signed a 15% EU tariff deal, easing tensions with Europe but drawing criticism from France and Germany. Now we are joined by Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst, joins us live from Taipei, Taiwan. Thank you, Ross, for joining us. Good to see you. Now, do you think is there a chance that today we will see any breakthrough?
I'm not sure if there'd be any breakthroughs. It's possible that there could be an extension. It's possible that they could reach an agreement on some other up to now intractable, difficult issue. One of the things that's on the agenda, in addition to just what the tariff rates would be, are long-time U.S. concerns with market access for different industries to China, such as financial services, to give but one example. So China has a lot that they could give up in negotiations on the market access side or non-tariff barriers. So it's possible that they could make headway, but again, I'd be cautious about predicting anything that we could call breakthrough.
And Ross, now, do you think that this temporary extension will be enough to address the underlying tensions between them? And what is the obstruction here for them that they are struggling to reach a trade deal?
The underlying tension from the perspective of President Trump and his trade negotiators is the extraordinary trade surplus that China runs with the United States. And just like with other countries or with the European Union, President Trump wants to address countries that have tremendous trade surpluses with the United States. One of his way of doing that is through raising tariff rates. Another way he's trying to address that is by negotiations and convincing these other countries or the EU to buy much more from the United States. And President Trump, to be fair to him, he's been successful in obtaining those commitments from several U.S. trading partners, whether that's to buy more U.S. energy, more U.S. agricultural products. In some cases, countries have committed to buy more U.S.-made weapons. So we know what kind of the broader negotiating parameters are and what the Trump administration wants to address in these talks. And then for China, the U.S. is still an important export market for China, hugely important. And they still want to be able to sell their manufactured goods into the United States, even if they do have to accept the reality that going forward, the tariff that the United States is going to charge on China-made products is significantly higher than it's been in the past.
And Ross, now looking at a bigger picture here, the recent 15% tariff that's been done between President Donald Trump and the EU seems to ease some tensions there. But could this shift in U.S.-EU relations affect the broader U.S.-China trade dynamic?
That's a really good question to ask, and at the moment we simply don't know, because we don't know what kind of deal the U.S. and China are ultimately going to reach with regard to the very large number of issues on their bilateral trade agenda. However, there's no likelihood that the U.S. would give China a tariff as low as 15%. I'd be shocked if the Trump administration agreed to a tariff that low. In some ways, these negotiations are operating on very different tracks. In some ways, there's some overlap. For example, the U.S. wants China to buy more energy. The EU has also agreed to buy more U.S. energy. So how that's going to turn out over time, because there's only so much capacity and there's only so much shipping capacity, for example, that could handle energy exports. So it's possible that going forward, the EU, China might be competing for U.S. energy. So that'll be something to watch. But going forward, what is the U.S. business relationship going to be with China versus the European Union? It's really just too early to say.
And Ross, lastly, do you think there is any card that China can play here to reach a deal? Is there something that can make or break a deal between them?
There are a number of cards that China has. One is the card that China played this spring, which was to restrict the exports of rare earth minerals to the United States. President Trump then heard from CEOs from companies that whose manufacturing processes require these inputs, and a lot of these inputs for now are sourced from China. CEOs were calling President Trump, including in the automotive and other industries, saying we're going to have to shut down production because we don't have rare earths. China has cut off supply. And then as part of the truce between the United States and China, China agreed to resume shipments of those rare earths. So that's one significant card that China has. But again, as I mentioned earlier, another significant card that China has is removing non-tariff barriers and addressing market access issues that have prevented U.S. companies from competing fairly in the Chinese marketplace. One thing we know is that U.S. CEOs are still very eager to do business in China. Even though China's growth has slowed down, it's now hovering around 5% a year when it used to be 8% a year. There's the real estate crisis that's unresolved. But large American companies still think they can make money in China. That's why there's all this talk about President Trump visiting China and bringing a large delegation of CEOs with him. So another card that China has is offering access to the Chinese market to American companies.
One thing that, Ross, they are both eyeing is the compromise on technology transfers. Do you think this will remain a key maybe discussion in the ongoing discussion between China and U.S.?
Secretary of Commerce Lutnick put it in a very easy to understand way a few weeks ago when he was asked in an interview, how come the United States has agreed to allow the resumption of the sale of NVIDIA's H20 chip to China? And Secretary of Commerce Lutnick said it's not the best technology, it's not even the second or third, it's more like the fourth best. And we're comfortable allowing that to be sold to China because then it would increase U.S. reliance on American technology, which is also a point that NVIDIA's CEO, Jensen Huang, has repeatedly made, that, as he likes to say, we want China and other places around the world to rely on the American tech stack, as they call it. So we see kind of the broad parameters here, including in the very difficult tech space, which is that the U.S. government is likely to agree that certain chips and other tech products can be sold to China as long as it's not the latest and the newest and the most advanced.
Thank you very much, Ross Feingold, for joining us as always and sharing your insight as a political analyst. He joined us live from Taipei. Now we move on to our next news. The European Commission has denied claims that its pledge to boost U.S. fossil fuel imports undermines climate goals. The $750 billion deal includes liquefied natural gas, oil, and nuclear fuel from the U.S., aimed at replacing Russian energy. Brussels says the move ensures energy security and does not derail its plan to become carbon neutral by 2050. EU spokesperson Anna-Kaisa Ikonen said the agreement aligns with the bloc's long-term decarbonization targets. The deal comes amid rising concerns from climate groups, who warn it could delay clean energy efforts, but EU officials insist the transition remains on track. Let's have a look at what the EU spokesperson had to say.
The political agreement reached on Sunday concerns the 3 next years. So the ambition for increased energy imports and investment from the United States only covers the next 3 years. Our decarbonization policies go much beyond. So this agreement does not contradict our medium to long-term decarbonization objectives or targets at all.
Now we are joined by guest for this discussion, Shruti Das Gupta. She's an international affairs expert, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you, Shruti, for joining us. Good to see you. Now, how do you assess this delicate balancing act between EU saying that they are supporting US with exporting or importing these US energy, while their ambitions of carbon neutrality seems different and far away?
Greetings, Asuma. Thank you for inviting me. Well, I call what this deal as a fantasy deal because they have only tried to push the devil back into its cage, and herein being the US tariffs. Like many other nations who are making energy deals with US to have US tariff wars not play up to their disadvantage, EU has done the very same thing. They've only made a deal for 3 years. The details of it is still not known, but to expect that it is going to be $250 billion every year for the next 3 years in US energy exports, it would be comical as well as fantastical in nature. Basically because it would have, the EU already takes about 40% of its liquefied natural gas from US, and it also takes about 15% of its petrol products from the petroleum products, from oil products from the US. To scale up to that level, they would have to have a massive investment in shipping, in refineries, and EU in its own can only define, is not a legal body to enforce trade. So private companies cannot be forced to abide by what the deals that EU has made on its terms. So it is going to be, it's really a fantasy just to make the optics of Trump look better, and EU to avoid the giant 30% trade tariffs that was being threatened and shoveled down its throat. So it's a fantasy trade. It is not going to go through, and the climate activists are, of course, unhappy about it because it does derail their plans, or at least delayed it by 3 years. But the 2050 clean energy project, for that, it would be a minor hiccup.
And Shruti, now climate activists have raised concerns that this fossil fuel deal might slow the EU's clean energy efforts. So do you think their criticisms are valid?
Their goal, the climate activists' goal, and as well as all the other EU policies up till now, including of green energy as well as green cars, green tech, has been very unidirectional and forceful, not only for the people who are manufacturing in EU, but the people who do trade with EU. They have to abide by these laws. So when you make a deal which is petro-specific with the US, that means you're ready to pull back on those policies as well. You're going to become more carbon heavy in terms of your energy. It might give you a chance to break away from dependence on Russia, but as it is since 2022 to now, the dependence on Russia has been greatly reduced. I think I have the numbers here somewhere. Last year they did only about 23 billion euros worth of energy trade with Moscow. So it looks as if the deal where the climate enthusiasts are saying that this is not good. Of course it is not good, but it is only for 3 years. So it is a hiccup, as I said before, but the ultimate goal would be something else, that is the clean energy. The policies are designed that way. They cannot force refineries to buy from US despite signing this deal. Hence, there is a lot of ambiguity of how this exact trade is going to go through in the next 3 years. So it is more of optics. You should, if the climate activists follow all of this without a word, of course their concerns will be rubbish. The more noise they make, the lesser likely it is that the EU is forcing this trade down the throats of private companies.
And Shruti, now, how do you see this tension affecting global climate diplomacy, particularly with countries that look up to EU for their actions towards green energy and energy transitions?
So energy transition, EU is the leader in terms of energy transition. It holds all other nations accountable by setting its own standards very high. When they do make a carbon heavy deal, it sends bad signals. It allows other nations to bypass this just so that they can get away with their carbon emissions and carbon footprint. And of course, it looks bad on EU itself. That is why I said it is more of a fantasy deal, because it is not just about how you make your energy security or how you deal with Trump. It is about a global entire infrastructure that is going to turn around and point fingers at EU and say, you did it, so why can't we? So all the other nations would be very happy with this, because it makes them have a breathing space as far as the climate emissions are and controls are concerned. So EU is in a tough spot, and I wonder how they'll wriggle out of this one.
Yes, we'll be watching that. Thank you very much, Shruti Dasgupta. Always nice hearing from you, your perspective as international affairs expert. Now we move on to our next news. A massive wildfire is raging near the village of Canelas in Portugal's Arouca region. With 500 firefighters deployed to the battle, the blaze that erupted on Monday. As temperatures soared to 33 degrees Celsius, local residents like Rafael Soros say it's heartbreaking to watch the destruction and are calling for urgent aid support. The region has seen devastation before. In September 2024, over 6,000 hectares were lost in fire in nearby Alvarenga. Authorities are racing to prevent a repeat of that disaster. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.